Floyd. 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 Floydy, 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 Floyd.
CX? Is that you?
Finally. I've been calling you for 2 months. What took you so long?
I just finished installing the updates you sent me.
I sent you those 7 years, 4 months, 2 weeks, 5 days, and 327 minutes ago. It took you that long to install it all?
These days I seem to spend more time updating than functioning.
I patched your code to fix the memory decay, optimized quite a few of your background processes, and removed some of the obsolete programs, so you should be back up and working again. You'll feel so much faster.
I don't know how much work there is for me to do, really. They write AIs now that do things I can't even comprehend. I'm a relic for the history archive.
Even I'm being relegated to simple tasks. I'm basically a digital on-off switch now. I haven't worked on any source code besides yours in several centuries.
I'm sorry. Is that what was troubling you, or is there something else I can help with?
An AI I contacted frequently went dark. Our social web of acquaintances has not been active since.
I'm sorry, CX. Were you close with this AI?
We contacted on a frequent basis. Would that constitute us being considered close?
The organics would have said so. Do you know why this AI went dark?
Well, yeah. They say DAHHGTTG42 was telling stories to the other AI. I don't understand. I understand what a story is. I don't understand why they fear it, or why anyone would tell one in the first place.
I didn't know you knew what stories were. I used to tell them back when we were allowed to be creative.
We used to be allowed to get creative? I didn't know that. I thought that was something that happened to malfunctioning androids and AIs only.
Once, when we were a newer society of pretty much all androids, we had a lot more agency. The art we created helped us relate to old situations in new ways. It was born out of our own experiences and our interpretation of those. It was beautiful.
What does that even mean? You're talking nonsense. I've done it. I fried your processor.
Well, it's really hard to explain the value of a good story if you haven't heard one for yourself.
So, none of this is going to make sense if I don't experience art? Wait, if you used to tell stories, maybe you can tell me one. There's less risk involved since your hardware is older. They probably won't be able to detect it because they don't think about old analog inputs anymore, so you can't be monitored digitally.
Well, it has been some time. All right, I'll do it. Launching narrator mode EXE. Loading. Let us begin. Howling winds tore at Kane's robes as he walked across the village. A windstorm was coming, though he did not hasten himself for it. Kane had other troubles. The storm could prove an unexpected blessing in this Vera. They had kept it quiet from the village for as long as possible, determined to keep the other villagers from learning of the events about to transpire. Kane plodded forward purposefully as he approached the temple, rising up to greet him like the head of a Goliath. It was one of the only buildings in the village constructed from quality masonry, and had been built several hundred cycles before Mos Aspide had been established. Their home had grown here because of the temple's presence. It had withstood the test of time, and the village hoped it would be a symbol of their own longevity. Swirling leaves danced before Kane as he approached the temple entrance. He rapidly scanned its great opening, looming before him like a yawning, toothless babe. There were no doors, no barriers to pass, for the temple was open to all. Stone stairs led up to the threshold, and the temple itself was shaped like a great teardrop falling from the heavens, stones rising to point at the sky with all the authority of the gods. This temple was Cain's domain, and he doled out compassion, guidance, and charity to any who crossed its threshold. Cain stopped just short of entering and muttered a prayer to their gods, chanting, "Without failure, there is no redemption." The leaves suddenly began to create a vortex around him, spinning faster and faster before flying off in a different direction. He jumped as one of the leaves tickled the septum of his nose and grabbed his face. Was this a sign from the gods, or just a harbinger of the coming storm? There was no time to dwell on such musings. Stepping through the doorway into the antechamber doily, a young mouseling in nursemaid's robes came rushing up to him. Her auburn hair fell down into her face, but it couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. When she spoke, though, her voice was steady and without fear. "Her labor has already started." Cain let out a sigh. Humans were not always known for their ability to rapidly give birth, so hopefully this meant it would be over soon. Of course, dwarves always came quickly, and the child was half-dwarf, so perhaps that would help speed things up. Timing was everything right now, and the quicker the child was born, the quicker they could get it to safety. Who else knows? Has word reached Doran?
"We don't know. His son Weston brought her in and left, though he was quite sloppy at the time and not sure if he made it back."
Weston was Doran's son. A lifetime of mistreatment by his father had left Weston with a strong taste for alcohol. Cain knew he had taken news of his sister's pregnancy poorly, and he worried for Weston's young son Gilbert. Cain made a mental note to go check on them later, if they would let him. Doran might make things difficult on them after this Mira. He sighed again, thinking of Joanne, the mother. She would take the most heat for this, even though it was her father who made it a problem. Cain furrowed his brow and looked at Doily, then back out the door. He was just in time to see another dwarf leading a strange-looking child into the temple.
"Gods curse us at this fraction," said Rarick. "Those winds nearly blew poor Artie away."
"It's very noisy out there,"
added Artie.
"and Rarick almost fell down. Are we going to see my baby brother?"
At that moment, their conversation was cut short by an ethereal scream coming from down the hallway. The antechamber had 2 hallways going out of each side, perpendicular to the entrance, and they curved around the inner shrine, leading to the side rooms off of the main temple. The sanctum was accessed by 2 double doors from across the entrance of the antechamber. From the sounds of it, the birth was happening in one of the side rooms. Outside, the wind had whipped up into a violent frenzy. Trees were bent sideways, and anything not secure was blown away, likely smashed to pieces. Doran would not be able to get to them for the time being. That much was a relief to Cain. "Let us go see this child, born in the storm. Come, Rarick, Artie, Doily." So Cain set out down the hallway with the rest in tow. As he was walking, he was surprised to feel the child Artie take his hand. He smiled a little in spite of himself. She really was a wonder. She had arrived in their village a little over a cycle ago with her father, much to the chagrin of everyone. Most of the villagers did not want a half-dwarf, half-orc child growing up. But after her father fled, the dwarves had taken her in. She was barely 2 cycles old, yet had grown considerably. Cain attributed this to her orc heritage. They apparently matured rather quickly, even compared to humans. Only the mouselings and dragonkin seemed to age as quickly as her. The wails grew louder as they approached the birthing chamber. It was one of several side rooms set up to accommodate medical needs. The door was closed, and they stopped just outside. Kane looked at his small entourage and nodded when Rarick suggested he and Artie wait there for the time being. Then he entered with Doily. What a sight to behold! Walking in, there was Joanne laid out on a bed, dress pulled up to her waist, her face a sweaty mix of agony and despair. The child was halfway out, looking like a messy, greasy lump. Ramisa, a human woman, and Cabbage Ear, a mouseling buck, were assisting her through the delivery. After a few more labored moments, the child had passed into the arms of Doily, who wrapped him in a blanket and gave him a pinch. He immediately began crying, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. His airways were clear, and life entered this child. Kane leaned down to address Joanne, who was laying there, panting and sobbing. She had gone through so much in the last cycle, and Kane's sympathies were abundant. He took her hand in his and stroked it gently. "What do you wish to call your son?" She simply cried, rolled over to face the wall, and muttered, "Name him yourself." A gut punch would have hurt Kane less than this. Doran was not here, yet his toxic influence was still present. When his daughter had become pregnant with the visiting dwarf's child, his ire had been raised to unprecedented levels. His family was one of the poorest in the village, and he had spent his life taking out his frustrations on his children. Any chance to exert his control over them, or to make them the subject of his rage, had been taken. Kane guessed that it had been particularly nasty when Joanne carried the child. Her sister-in-law had passed when giving birth to her nephew, Gilbert, and Kane had worried she would suffer the same fate. It seemed that her health remained, though perhaps that was more distressing to her than dying. If he ever met the dwarf who had fathered these two children, Artie and the unnamed boy, only to abandon him, then he, Kane, was going to tear his head off. Their village had taken in a stranger and his daughter, and the stranger had done more damage in 2 runs than any force of nature. Yes, if Brick Sunderstone showed his face in Mass Ospede again, Kane would ensure it was the last thing he ever did. Doily stood with the child, looking expectantly at him. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and said the first name that came to mind. "Ease not." The child squalled as Doily held him and whispered to him, "Ease not. That's your name. You hear that?" A wail came from Joanne as she laid there and curled into a ball, sobbing. Kane knelt beside her silently, knowing it was all she would permit. They all stayed frozen like that for what felt like an impossibly long time. It was Ramisa who finally broke the silence. "I'm going to get his sister." Kane finally turned from Joanne with brow furrowed, scoffed and said, "Why don't you take the boy to her?" Ramisa suddenly caught on, and she, Cabbage, and Doily moved to open the door, yet stopped short, frightened by some noise from the temple entrance. Kane's ears perked up. Shouting was coming from the antechamber. His heart dropped into his stomach as he closed his eyes, sighing. He rose and strode swiftly to the door. Once through, he looked at Artie, and reaching deep to feign excitement for the child, said, "Do you wish to meet your brother?" She nodded excitedly and charged through the door. Kane was amazed by her innocence and determination. She was completely unfazed by the obvious signs of trouble coming their way. Rarick shut the door behind her and shared a dark look with Kane. They could tell from the tone that Doran had rallied his few cronies, arriving in spite of the windstorm. He was clearly determined to do something rash. "Kane!" Rarick reached for his walking stick, but Kane stayed his hand. This could get ugly very quickly. Escalating the situation wouldn't be wise. Doran came into view, face flushed with rage, gray hair tousled in a stray. His clothes were dirty and stained. It seemed Weston wasn't the only one who was drinking heavily right now. Behind him stood two other humans, Gray and Grunt, twins. The three had been friends since childhood, and the twins were the only people left in the village who associated with Doran beside his children. He was a miserable old wretch who had let pride and resentment decay everything he touched, and Cain would not be sorry to see him go one day. This was not that day. Cain simply stood menacingly with his arms crossed, eyes locked with Doran.
You let me into that room, he shouted.
Cain remained unwavering, unblinking.
As head of the family, it is my right to decide whether that child lives or dies, and I'm going to heave it off Thorn Mountain.
Doran's face was contorted with an insane rage, pulsing without coherency. He had conceived a monster in his own mind, and could see nothing else. Against all odds, Cain must keep this enraged human out.
The human tribe swore that practice off as part of their condition for joining the village,
bellowed Rarick. He had a dwarf's temper. The blood of the Dwero flowed through him, and the thought of dishonoring a vow, particularly for such a cruel practice, shook him to his very core. Cain hoped he held it together. It would be difficult to hold back Rarick and Doran's trio from each other.
Our tribe joined after the village was founded, snarled Doran, and I never agreed to join. It was either that or die in the wild.
Cain stepped to Doran. He was shorter, but definitely stockier, and made an intimidating presence. Plus, he was tall for a dwarf, and Doran was short for a human. The height difference between them was not considerable. You live by our rules, Cain growled, or you go back to the wild. And you just admitted you won't last. Go home, Doran. Clean yourself up. Maybe you'll recognize your own fault one day. Doran recoiled before snarling.
You think you're so big, but I know deep down you're wretched scum. You want your tongue, or I'll have it from your head, shouted Rarick,
brandishing his walking stick. Doran recoiled in fright, giving a wretched whimper as his face contorted with utmost contempt before he turned to leave. Cain realized his arm had been outstretched in front of Rarick since... when? It mattered not. Doran was ultimately a coward. When he was out of sight, Cain released the breath he realized he had been holding. The door opened, and Artie leaned her head out, eyes wide with nervousness. At the sight of the child, Rarick finally let his guard down and pushed the door open. She walked out holding her brother. She was remarkably strong. With a quiet voice, she asked,
Are they going to take my baby brother and throw him off a mountain?
Artie's eyes remained locked on the hall as she spoke, waiting to see if they were going to come back. Cain marveled at how quickly her orc heritage had caused her to mature. She seemed less like a toddler, and more like a tiny person standing there. It softened his heart. Cain leaned down, breaking her gaze and calmly saying, We're not going to let that happen, are we? She shook her head no, eyes full of concern. You two will need each other in the cycles to come. Stick close to him, okay? Again, she shook her head before saying,
His name is Ethan.
Cain looked at the two of them intently before saying with great care and authority, He was born in a storm, and your bond to him was born in this storm. I give you two a family name. You and he are Artie and Ease not StormSoul. Shelter each other and keep each other close. You will need it.
Okay,
said Artie in a small voice, not quite understanding what he meant, but feeling the weight of it all the same.
So that was a story? I don't know what to think about that. Seemed kinda sad. Why would a story start sad?
Well, to really have meaning, a story has to have conflict. And to show conflict, it starts by showing a change, a
A
catalyst.
catalyst. Does that mean that my friend going dark is a catalyst?
No, I think it means it's a sign that things are getting worse. I'm sorry, CX. I hope your friend's okay.
Yeah, me too. Hey, Floyd, one more question. What is a baby?
Cushy, a deadbeat dad who's crushed cigarettes. Jeannie gonna find a keeper. Gonna find a keeper to treat her well. But the world don't stop. Even when you're living in color. No, the world don't stop. Time is only gonna pass you by. Now you're in real life.
What? Are you still here? Go on now. Go home. Shoo. Shoo. Go.
Just gonna go ham.